Welcome back to Painting with Yuk-Sem. My name is Yuk-Sem Won, and I'll be bringing you step by step through an acrylic painting of clouds on a summer day. I'll show you what colors, shapes, and brushes to use to get the desired effect. And the paint colors that I'm going to be using are going to be going across the screen. So I want you to feel free though to use whatever colors or techniques that you want to experiment with. But for now, let's get started. So I'm using my large flat brush, and we're going to be getting some water on it first. So one of the reasons why I do that is that it not only adds with the acrylic paint that it gets a bit of moisture in there so you can get coverage, but it also can extend that paint. So I went and got some blue, the light blue, and I'm going to start right away with going and covering that background. You'll see that if you use the acrylic paint straight, what you end up getting is that you see the canvas through the paint. And that means that your paint is usually either you need to add a lot more to it, or the other thing you can do to get better coverage is to add some water to it, and it'll really get it to spread all over the canvas. One of the tricks that I use when I'm doing a blue sky is that I'll go on the outer edges with the pure color, and then once I decide where I want my sun to be, then I'll come in with some white and lighten it, and that will give you a little bit more of a depth, even though the sky is all blue. So in this painting, I think what I'm going to end up doing is coming in with a sun near the top here. So that's the area. I didn't wash my brush. I just got the white and I put it right on the blue to give me that lighter area here compared to the sides. And then I'll come in and I'll blend it with the rest of the blue. So again, I'm going to get a bit of water and a bit of the blue and just making sure that I cover. At first, I'm just making sure the paint is all spread out, and then I'll worry about my brush strokes. So now I have that white area there. I'm going to want to concentrate it. So I'm going to wash off my brush for a bit, get some of that water off, go and get some of the white. And I'm going to come in with that sun up here. It's not going to be pure white because the paint is still wet. But what I'm going to start doing is going in a round brush stroke. So if I went straight across, it's going to give you a very flat kind of wide angle. This way, same with the up and down, it'll give you a longer sense of direction. But when I go with the round, it looks like an aura where it's radiating out. So with the round stroke, and the way to get a nice round stroke is to remember doing a C on this side and the belly of that B on this side, and then you get the idea of a round circle. Getting a nice circle when you're painting is just a matter of practice. It's sometimes you can just sit there and for a half hour keep on doing a circle until you get that your arm will remember that motion. So when you do want to do it on an actual painting, your arm and your wrist know that feel of getting that radius. So you can tell that by going over the white, the white and the blue and having the paint already wet, what it's done is that it's blended it really nicely and made it seem like there's already an aura from the sun. So I'm going to wait for that to dry, and then I'll come in and do a sun once it's a little bit drier. What I'm going to start with now is showing you how to make some clouds. So my brush has a little bit of blue and a little bit of white on it, because the clouds aren't as dark as the sky, but they aren't necessarily all white yet. So I'm just going to decide where to put some in and start marking them out. So to mark out clouds, you can either do two things. You can do circles or you can do little X's and just get an area of where, an idea of where you want them to be. And then I can come in and with a little bit more white, start to add where I'd like them to be. I'm washing off my brush because I'm going to be changing to the round brush. Now I'm just going to pick up some white and mix it with a little bit of that blue so that I have lighter than what the sky is, but not as light as what I want for the sun. So clouds are actually a buildup of layers. If you try and paint the cloud in the first go, you'll have a very one-dimensional, just kind of basic shape of a cloud. So in order to get that depth into it, you have to do it in layers. So I always try and build from the inside of the cloud out. So on the edges, usually the clouds that most people want to get are the rounded ones, although there are some that have that flatter shape. We'll just concentrate on the round ones for today. So there's that C motion that I'm getting to get the idea of those circles. And I'm doing bigger C's in the middle and littler ones to kind of get the definition on the sides. And I'm not worried about getting a different area with white paint or blue paint, because that'll just come in and add some depth to it right away. So in the same thing on this one, and now instead of doing the C that way, I'm doing the circle towards the right. Which will give me that direction of the cloud. At the bottom of your clouds, what you're going to want to do is make sure that instead of a C, that it's all a circle, the bottoms flatten out a little bit and look almost like little wave strokes near the bottom. So that's what I'm going to make sure. And if the sun's at the top, you want the bottoms to be more in the shade, so they're going to be a bit darker. So I always make sure that when I'm putting the paint on, that the bottoms are not part of that light color that I'm going to be using. So here, now I'm almost finished with the blue that I want. So I'm going to wash off the blue paint. And one of the tricks to washing off your brush is that you can paint the bottom of your water dish. I have one that has ridges on the bottom, which is really convenient. It's an old noodle bowl that I have and I've saved and recycled. You wipe it off on the edge to get most of the water off, and then you paint on your napkin. On the napkin, you can see if you have a lot of color, that means that there's still color inside your brush. If you wipe it off and there's almost no color, then you're good to go. If there's a lot of color, just go and wash it off again so that you're not blending unintentionally your colors. So now I'm going to start building, and it's a very subtle building of the whites for the clouds. So I'm going to come over, and I see the outline, although it's hard to see in the blue, but there's an outline that's there, and I'm going to build inside of that with a lighter color that's going to pick up some of the blue, so it's naturally blending it for me. The C strokes, the rounded strokes for the tops, and a bit more of a wave shape flattened out one for the bottom. I'm going to come in here again, the rounded shape at the top, building some of those bubbles that we like to see on top of clouds, and then bringing it down into more of a flattened wave type there. And here I'm going to do the same with those bubbles on the top. And I'm not worried if I have areas like this that have a lot of white, because that's just going to be the sun catching it. So if I blend it, that's fine. And if I end up getting some of those areas that have bigger straight white in it, that's okay. So now I'm going to come in on one of the final layers, and what I'm going to do is here is really concentrate on what do I want that cloud to look like, because it's almost getting into that white. So I'm just paying more attention to how do I want those layers to look, and what, because whatever is lightest is going to be the one that from the sun is hitting down onto the cloud, which is a surface, so it's going to be lighter for that area. Make sure that I'm not losing that dark at the bottom. Just add a bit of blue. Now I'll do this one. So the sun is here and it's hitting the cloud, so it's going to hit a lot more on the top cloud than it does on the bottoms. So I'm going to come in and add some of those areas and then just blend it down, and the back area here is going to be a little bit more white here, but maintaining that shadow, which is the blue near the bottom. A bit too much white there, so just add some blue. And the nice thing with clouds is that you can always touch up and come back to them. It's one of those things that you can paint and for hundreds of hours come back and keep on touching up and adding. It'll take you maybe a half hour to learn how to paint them, and it takes you about 500 to decide that that's enough is enough, and that's how I like my clouds. So I'm going to finish up this last one, making sure I'm getting all those areas of where the light is touching, and then keeping that shadow with the blue near the bottom. All right. Now the background's dried a little bit, so I'm going to be able to come in and do that sun. So there's that C for the rounded to the left, and then I'm going to do another one to the right, and then I can paint in the center and make sure that I'm getting that coverage of the sun. One of the ways that I like painting the sun is to give it those rays. So then I'll just come from the center with a bit of paint on my brush and decide to be bold and bring a straight line. So the light travels in straight lines, whichever, and it radiates out. So that's why you do end up seeing some of those auras. It's kind of like we draw the sun when we're kids. The way that we can improve on that is by, once you have your basic ones, you can just go from the center of your sun out a little bit. And I don't have a lot of paint on my brush, so it's more of a dry brushing, where I'm just spreading some of the paint into those rays, kind of like that. And then I'll come back in, add another layer of white on top of the original sun, and then I'll lightly go over in that rounded circle in the areas around the sun, and that'll give it that aura. And I'm not worried if I get some areas with a bit more of a white paint on it, because it just looks like that ray is hitting something in the atmosphere and giving us a bit of a brighter sunbeam. So that's generally how you do the big fluffy clouds. What you can do after is just grab a bit of paint, so your brush is almost dry, it's not wet, it doesn't have a ton of the white on it, and just near the edges I'm just going back and forth, sweeping it a little bit, and that, by not keeping it in a straight line but going back and forth a little bit and over and under some of the clouds, it'll give you those wisps of clouds as well. So that's another technique you can use to fill in some of those areas around your sun that you want, maybe some clouds, but not necessarily the big fluffy ones. One of the tricks is that if you do get a fluffy one, an area, and then all of a sudden your paint gets too thick, go and grab some more paint and just build a little bit of a cloud on top. And nobody's going to know if you wanted a cloud there or not. So I'm just going to add a little bit there, and a few wisps here. And I'm going to clean off my brush. I'm actually going to grab the pointed brush, a little bit more of the details. So it's fairly large. But what I'm going to do is wherever the sun is hitting on a cloud, on the tops of those bubbles, I'm going to come in and highlight them. So it's not a great big thick line. What I do is that I start applying pressure, I apply more, and then I lift it off. And that'll give me a thin, thick, thin kind of brush stroke. And then I can just come in and add some of those areas that wherever there's that line from those circles that you want to highlight that the sun is hitting. So the idea is to go from the light source and say, where is that light hitting that cloud? And what do I want to highlight? And then you can come in and blend it a little bit if you want, and really just get some of that texture to come through. And I'm going to do the same for these ones up here, that wherever there's a really dense part of the cloud where the light's hitting, that's what I'm going to highlight with the white. And the last one down here, because the light's coming right down, it's going to get a little bit of it all. And if you're running out of the paint and you start seeing the canvas through, go get a bit of water and a bit more paint, thin it out to be able to get that nice fluid line for the tops of those clouds. Remembering at the same time that you don't really want to put any of that white on the bottom edge of your cloud. The last piece is, if there's some that are nice and big and I want them to stand out, that's where I come in and fill those in a little bit more with that white. So it's all about layering. And this process can go from 3 layers till you have maybe 10 or 15 layers of clouds, and you just keep on building until you have the effect that you want. One of the things that I always try and teach is that when you're looking at your painting and you've been working on it for a fair bit, always step away, go take a 5-minute break, and come back and look at it from about 10 or 15 feet away so that you can see what does it actually look like and where do I need to improve or touch it up. Because when you're always within a foot of your painting, you end up seeing all the brush strokes and the color, but you forget to see the subject of your painting. So in this case, you really do want to step back and see the forest, not necessarily the trees. I'm just going to add a bit of white to my sun again. And just like that, you should have the impression of having some of those nice fluffy clouds. One of the things is that clouds are something that you need to practice. It's not something that's on the first go is necessarily going to be one of those perfect fluffy clouds. It's a matter of practicing and adjusting and adding to what you're doing. Once you have your sky and your clouds and your sun, you can really add anything to it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to add some color to the bottom, in which we'll do a lake scene. So I'm going to grab, the general rule is whatever is above a lake is going to be reflected in the bottom, so that's going to be the color. So, but I'm grabbing some dark blue just to get that horizon line so that I can see what we're doing. And then after that, I come in with that light blue that I have in the sky. I'm going to start adding that color into it. The trick with a lake, one of the most common mistakes I see is that they're going to try and do a lake and do waves or a bowl shape. But what that ends up doing is that if your lines are tilted or in a bowl, your lake is going to look like it's in a bowl or that it's tipping out. So the key to getting a nice water, or the basic shape of water, is to always remember that it has to be horizontal and completely level. You can have all like little dips from the waves, but it really does have to be very level when you're painting it. So the further away your water is, the darker it will become, and then the mid-range should reflect the sky, and then the bottom again, you can pick up a little bit of that darker color to give the impression of it being a little bit closer, that you can see through a little bit. And I'm just going to grab some of the blue for this corner and blend it in. And then what we're going to try and do is show you how to get a really nice tree line fairly simply. So I'm going to use, it's an angled brush, and that's the one that I used to do the background here on the lake. Oh, I'm going to fill that in a little bit. So I'm going into my dark green, and it's sap green. And then in the back, the way that I'm going to do the tree line is that I have my angled brush vertically, not horizontally, which will give me a fat line, but vertically, that'll give me a nice thin line. And then I press down. When you start it very lightly, and then press it down, and that'll thicken the brush stroke. So when you start doing that a little bit more randomly, what it ends up doing is giving you that nice tree line. And what you don't want is for your trees to be all lined up in a row like they're on a tree farm. You really want to have some randomness to it. So I'm just going to keep on going across, and if it's lighter or darker, that's fine. I'm overlapping my trees in the back, hiding. The good thing about trees is that it'll always hide the areas that you want. Now I'm just going to go grab a bit of the black with some of the sap green and do the trees that are closer. It's the same motion that I had. It's just doing a row of the trees that's closer. It doesn't have access to as much sun, so they are darker. And then I'm just going to fill it in with some of that black in the bottoms. I'm going across to get that line, and then I'm just going to come and dab in front of it to get a little bit of that different texture from the brush. There. So one of the ways to do a really quick reflection is just with the paint that's on there. I've added a bit of water. I'm going to grab it. I'm just going to pull it down from the paint that was already there. And what it does is when the paint is pretty wet, then it'll drag a lot. If not, add a little bit of black and then pull it down. And then every once in a while where you want a bit more of a reflection, then you can come in and add, where there's the taller trees, you can add a little bit more of that texture. like that. And then our last piece that we're going to be working on is the reflection of the sun and the clouds in the water. So I'm using that same angled brush, and I'm going to go right into my white. So wherever the sun is where you're going to get that bright white. So I'm using the angled brush, it's tilted to the side, so now it's horizontal, and I'm just going over lightly. I'm not pressing. If you press it, you're going to get a thick line, but if you just gently go on top and stagger those lines, you should get just the tops of those waves that's coming in. One of the ways to get water and a nice reflection is don't always go in the same way, because what happens is that your brush, that pressure will always start light and then go a bit heavier on it, and you end up getting very repetitive brush strokes. Whereas if you go back and forth, that's where you start getting a little bit more of that randomness that you see in nature. So again, I'm just coming in, and wherever that sun is where I want the most reflection. And I'm just making sure that I have lots of paint so that when I do dab here now, I'm getting a lot of that paint onto the canvas. And you can bring that right into those reflections of the trees to show that there is a water line all the way across. And then here there's a cloud. Oh, not with the green. The joy of paint, you just paint over it. So where that cloud is, I'm going to come in with that white and give them the basic shapes of what those clouds look like in my reflection. I'm going to come in with a little bit of that blue to get the bottom of those clouds to be really blue. So we know the difference between the sun and where the clouds are. And then we have the idea, at least the basics. So you can keep on touching up on this and adding to it, probably for a good hour or so of adding details. Do I want the trees to be a little bit more? Do I want a little bit more clouds? Do I want the sun to be a bit brighter? Do I want the water to look like it has a little bit more of the reflection of the sun here? So I'm just coming in with a bit more of a detail brush to make sure I get that color where I want that sun to be reflecting. And that'll give you the basic idea of how to do your sun and clouds and a bit of a lake scene on your thing. So thank you for joining me. I hope that you'll join me again, and I hope it sparked your interest and your creativity to start painting. All right, I'll see you next time.